Hi, it's Rebecca Jones of Dysart & Jones and of the Lead Institute. I'm happy to introduce a workshop that we recorded in June 2021 on articulating value and managing politics very well. It was called Standing Tall, organized by Jane Dysart. What you're about to see are the various speakers, starting with Mary Ellen Bates, then of course Stephen Abram and Jim Miller, then Donna Sheeter, and then Frank Biss. So there'll be a brief break in between each video so you can come back and use them. And also the PDFs of their slides are included in this blog post. Thanks so much.
I will just be giving you a little bit of some of my thoughts here. So let's see. The first thing just to keep in mind is when we're talking about ROI, when a special librarian or anyone in a non-traditional library setting, we think about, being able to show that we get the most value for the budget and that sort of thing, and look at the things that we're able to do even though you've cut our budget. I think that the conversation is much more effective when instead we're not talking about doing more with less, but we're talking about doing something more valuable. So something that can't be replaced and is critical to the mission and functioning of whatever organization you're in. And I'll talk about each of these items in a little more detail. The second one is that we need to not just focus on making information accessible. That's a great thing too, but we need to focus on making the right information discoverable to the people who need it. So more of a focus on how information goes into the workflow of our users. And then third is taking a proactive approach to talking about expenses. And instead of wincing when people are saying, well, look at all the money that you're spending on, whatever you fill in the blank, whatever line item on your budget people object to. I think we need to own that conversation and talk about it affirmatively so that we're not sounding like we're reactive or having to justify ourselves. So talking about first the doing something more valuable. It's focusing on everything that the library or information center is doing to ask yourself, is this the highest value that we can add to this service? And if not, what can we do differently? So even if you've got a service or a product that people really love, the question is always, is there something else that we can do that would be of higher value than what we're doing now? And sometimes you have to ask your users, what that is. We can't always intuit that ourselves. The questions that I found have been effective. And none of these questions are like promising anything to a user. It's not you're over promising or under delivering, but to ask to basically figure out what would be more valuable to your users. So asking, what are the results of this work? What are the results of this work being used for? And, there's confidentiality issues and you can address that, but just understanding, having the context, the workflow, what's going to happen next to whatever it is I send to my user or help my user do, enables us to be at a higher value. Or asking, and I've asked my clients that, is what would make this more useful to you? And the interesting thing is it's often something really simple. It's like, give me an executive summary in a slide deck format, or could I have a 5-minute conversation to just go over how to understand this spreadsheet that you sent me? So just understanding what one more thing would make the difference in making our deliverable more useful to the users. And then asking, when you're talking to any of your users or clients or patrons, whatever you call the people that use your services, finding out what they're working on, and just asking, how could the library support you on that project? Sometimes people just aren't thinking about where the library could contribute, or they don't realize the resources and the expertise that we're bringing to the table. So asking that on a regular basis is a great way to raise the awareness of our users on the other things that we can do that would make them more valuable. Second thing is making information more discoverable. And this, I did a series of interviews with special librarians for a couple of white papers that I did. And the thing that I just found so interesting, that all of the people I interviewed were talking about one of the biggest values of information professionals within an organization is that they break down information silos within the organization and serve as, that connecting place, the central, distribution point. And this isn't necessarily centralizing information services, although that may be appropriate too, but it's more of seeing yourself as the place, the coordinator of all of the people that are using the services within the library. So, for example, bringing together all the people that use a particular data set or database that you've licensed, having, organizing meetup groups. You don't have to know what they're using it for. Or you don't have to be expert in the applications that they're using it for, but you can bring the people together so that they can share their insights, APIs that they've developed, that sort of thing. So it's like thinking about how we can get more people to be using the resources that we have, finding new ways to collaborate. And this is, starting the conversation. Yes, we can help you with text and data mining. Yes, we can help you with, bringing in, semantic enrichment of a database and that sort of thing. It's like owning that conversation and asking. This was a really great insight. One of the librarians that I was talking to said that when she brought the data set users together for them to share their insights and that kind of thing, she also asked them at the end of the meeting, could they spend 2 minutes giving like a one sentence statement on the value of that data set to their operations. And she said she got such great testimonials because this was a time when everybody was thinking about the value that they were getting from that resource and from the library. So it's like seize the moment on where you can make the biggest impact and make the connections among the people. The other thing that I think is really important for InfoPros is to proactively talk about the strategic spending that we incur on behalf of the organization. And one of the things that I think is really important is that InfoPros have a different perspective on information spending than probably almost anyone else in your organization, because we look at the whole life cycle. It's, okay, we're acquiring this resource for this particular group, but who else might need this information? What do we do to enhance it? If we brought in a taxonomy, would that
Hey, Marriott, you might have muted or something like that on your mic.
I am muted.
Right.
Sorry about that. I just hit it by mistake. I'm going to go back. Was it just muted on this slide?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. I apologize for that. I tend to gesticulate wildly, and sometimes I hit my mute button as well. This is the danger of not having a lavalier mic. Anyway, the talking about the justifying strategic spending, and this is that InfoPros, we look at an information expense as a strategic resource, not just as money being paid to a vendor. And so we look at how else can we use this information? Where is another group that would get value out of it? What else can we do to enhance that information by adding a taxonomy to the content, for example? So it's understanding where we can add value to make it worth more and talk about that to the people that are asking about our budget. Likewise, InfoPros are really good about looking at the impact of what we're buying. So if you buy if you arrange for help with the licensing of content of a particular data set, we InfoPros can find other groups within the organization who might value it as well and get funding from them. So it's, it isn't always just the case that one group has to pay for it. So we look at who else, we understand the whole ecosystem of who uses information within the organization. Things like offering training, setting up portals, building APIs, things that embed those resources into people's workflow is a really great way of enhancing our value, because you've got people who now use and rely on this content on a regular basis, and they'll be tremendous advocates for you going forward. And I think it's also important to say, well, if we don't renew this resource this year, we'll save this money, here's the alternative, and here are the trade-offs that we have to make. So being able to talk about, yes, it's a big expense, and this is what we get for it. So rather than just sounding, defensive about it, I think it's important to own the fact that we're managing these resources for the benefit of the organization. And it's one of the people that I was talking to when I was interviewing all the special librarians about adding value and talking about ROI, said it was so frustrating. Every time a new executive comes into the organization, he had to, go through the whole spiel again, explaining, where the value is, why you need to use the library, blah, blah, blah. He was like, it just feels like it's a never-ending saga. And it is. That's what it boils down to, is it's important to always have a nice, short 2 or 3 sentence story that talks about the impact that the library has within the organization. This is, talk to your staff so that you've got a few of those great success stories so that you can talk about the impact, the collaboration that the library is involved in helping groups or departments or parts of your organization get their job done better with better information or better tools. It's just a matter of constantly knowing that we always have to be able to talk about the value that we provide. And I'll go real quickly through the talking about it so that we're talking in more value terms. So when someone asks you, so what do you do? This is a bean counter here, someone who's looking only at the budget and not the value. And I think what's really, really important is to describe ourselves by outcome rather than activity. When someone says, what do you do? We hear the word do and sort of think of, oh, okay, let me tell you about the activities that we're involved in. That's not actually what they're looking for. What they want to know is what's the outcome, what happened after the user, called the library, interacted with an information professional and went away happy. What was that? So here's a few examples of how to use different kind of language to talk about what you're doing. So instead of saying, we license these premium databases that are, fabulous resources, blah, blah, blah. That's what you do. But the outcome is we bring you fresh perspectives from the outside. Which of those two conveys value more to someone who's not an info pro? Likewise, you can say, when they ask, so what does the library do? You could say, we provide research services. Now, you and I know that that's a real value statement, but it doesn't connote value it doesn't convey value to a lot of the listeners. Instead, by saying we provide answers to your biggest challenges or something else that, again, resonates with your group is a much more compelling way to talk about what you do. Instead of talking about we offer centralized information acquisition, which is, again, it's a great value statement to another info pro, but it isn't to someone else. Instead, we ensure more strategic, cost-effective spending. Or instead of talking about we provide alert services, we reduce R&D expenses by ensuring better, more timely access to the information you need. All of these is like thinking about what happens after they've talked to the library and talking about that instead of about the actions that we took, even though it's hard to sometimes think that way. And my last thing that I just like everyone to keep in mind is that the way to talk powerfully about the ROI of information services and information professionals is knowing the impact of the information services on your users. So by asking them about that, you're more able to talk in a powerful way about your ROI. And that's it. I'm going to stop my sharing. All right.
Thank you
Take it
so
away
much.
next. Thank you.
Thanks, Mario. And you had a great start to to us, to our workshop today. And I'm so happy that you said that it's a never-ending process. Excuse me. I mean, our past doesn't necessarily, grant our future, and particularly these days after, the activities of the COVID days, as we call them, because everything is changing, can change, and we have to continually, build those supporters and champions who are or we're going to help support us. We have to innovate and be creative and keep looking at ways to provide value. And you gave so many great examples, including the outcomes. That's such a great way to look at it. And being prepared with the words so that you can just pop it into a conversation or answer a question. That's what all of the PR people say. Be ready with your answer. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that from Frank and Donna as they talk more about the positive politics and the influencing side of things. But we're going to go next to Stephen Abram and Jim Miller, and they're going to talk to us a little bit about knowing our communities really well and asking the right questions. Stephen has had a varied background working for all different kinds of libraries and supporters of libraries and vendors to libraries, and has a consulting business and a blog that is extremely popular, Lighthouse, Stephen's Lighthouse. And Jim Miller is on the PR side of things within the government ecosystem, and he has lots of positive things for us. And Jim also is currently on the SLA board. Is that right? I think that's right. Yeah.
Yep.
And of course, I didn't turn my phone off. Okay, guys, take it away.
Hey, Jim, why don't you start and I'll follow up.
Sure. I just had a few brief slides to show. Set up here.
Or I can start.
You can start. I'm having troubles getting the slides signed up, so or I can just skip the slides really. So either way,
I can
I'll just skip the slides for now.
My computer's okay.
Okay. So I'm going to take a totally different approach. As I said, as Jane mentioned, I've been focused, and most of my career has been in government and politics, and this is sort of a second career for me, being in the library world. So I have a degree in library science. I've never actually worked in a public library, or any library for that matter. I've worked in public policy. I was the director of policy to Canada's Minister of Human Resources and Skills Development, as well as Canada's Minister of Citizenship and Immigration. Went back to school to do library science and used these things really to beneficially while I was there. And so one of the things that I've actually seen it from both sides, and I see the value of info professionals in a lot of areas, both government and the corporate sector. And I think that that's the key to doing this, and our role. And as we get more and more into the sort of 24/7 news cycle, the flood of information that people have to deal with, the misinformation, our value increases significantly. And so that we can see that in order to advocate for our skills, and we need to really stand up for ourselves and to sorry, I'm trying to load my slides at the same time. We really need to stand up for ourselves and make those pitches. And I think that we can actually help in a lot of ways to help people to stand up for the value of information pros. So one of the key things I find is that in order to do that, the standpoint of going and this is sort of partly what Mary Ellen was saying, is sort of showing the opportunity cost of not doing it. So, for example, if we have information pros that can find information that may not be readily available, it's just the Google that everyone uses, this is standard Google search. You could save companies significant amounts of money, significant amounts of embarrassment as well from a reputation management standpoint. You could actually, so it's sort of from the standpoint of saying, well, because in a lot of places they see a library information center as a cost center, not so much as a center that says, oh, we're contributing to the value of this company. And I think that one of the things that is quite helpful from the standpoint of the skills that we have is that we're able to find stuff that others may not be able to do, save companies a lot of money, but also make things clear for people and make things clear for individuals like the C-suite as well. And I think that this, I'm just going to use a lot of my experience from in government. So being on the other side of the table, where people are coming here looking for legislative change, they're looking for regulatory change, or even looking for financial assistance or funding from the government. And I find that the best people that were able to do it were people that had the skills that we have as information pros, because they were able to do have the background on from the standpoint of going into the meeting all the way, like, so the preparatory work, and as well as in doing their presentation. So, I think that that's one of the keys that we're able to do is the putting together an ask for what you're looking to change or what you're looking to advocate for. And so doing your research. I mean, we as info pros are able to do the background research on what is the best place to look, for sources of funding or best person to speak to. And that's key piece, is knowing who you're supposed to be talking to, right? So I think that the key to that is doing your research and even knowing who the right person to talk to and knowing something about them. I had, numerous opportunities to hear from various stakeholder groups that would come forward looking for thousands, if not millions of dollars, who didn't do any research as to why, they were even in the right place. They had no idea what the program that they were applying to offered. They had no idea what other organizations were already doing, which is also, and I think that's where the info pros come in handy in the sense of being able to find that information that says, here are the other organizations that are doing similar work to us, or so that helps to do either competitive intelligence or even look for collaboration opportunities. So I think that that's a key piece to know. The other piece with that is to say the collaboration pieces is important because it also demonstrates that you can find those people, speak to those people, and then also demonstrates that other people are willing to invest in whatever project that you're looking to change. And I think one of the keys, and Mary Ellen has already hit on this, is in the language. And in particular, you have to speak in a language of the people that you're talking to. And I'm focused mostly on government, politicians, in the sense of saying what they want to hear is how what you are looking for is actually going to match up with what their priorities are and how it fits together. And I think that there's a key in any little place that you could find any sort of connections and also speak the language that they use. I used to basically throwing their own language back at them and saying, well, if they said, our key priority is, fighting disinformation or misinformation, then, you have those tools that say, we can meet that priority. So I think that using their language and putting everything in their language, as opposed to, as Mary Ellen says, just talking about task-based stuff, then you're not, which isn't as effective. The other thing too is, again, one of the things that we're really good at in the sense from an information management standpoint is just the whole concept of sort of environmental monitoring and awareness. So we're actually, looking at multiple sources of information, more relevant sources of information, and able to put that together quickly. That actually, again, demonstrates that great value from an advocacy standpoint that says, this is something that is coming up on the horizon. Let's deal with it before something happens with it. So I think that the key to this, in the sense of where we're at from the library and information management standpoint, is for far too long, and I'll speak, my recent experience on the board has shown me is interesting, because I think that advocacy is something that we have to probably do more of that demonstrates value. If you look at the number of communities, unfortunately, the news community. When I first started doing this not that long ago, there was a lot of people in the newspaper business that had newspapers, television stations that had librarians and had information professionals that could help vet stories, do fact checking. We need those people more than ever. So, but unfortunately, most of those positions, the news community is now gone from SLA. More than ever to stand up and talk about what our value is, and that's both internally as far as people, protecting your own jobs and career security, but also to grow the profession, and as well as to help other people to fight disinformation when we're doing advocacy work on any topic, really, because that's the unfortunate reality is that if government and had more resources like we had, as far as the information management, there'd be a lot better public policy and a lot better politics as well, I think, in discourse. So I think that it's something that we have to, as taking from the heading of the topic, stand tall and articulate our values. So that's sort of the key to what we need to do. Like Mary Ellen, I could go on forever about this and give loads of examples of people that had bad information or not a plan together. But I'm just going to leave it at that, and I'll let Stephen continue.
Thanks a lot. And like Jim, I could listen to Mary Ellen forever. I'm hoping that I'm sharing my screen in 2 seconds.
And while Stephen's doing that, I'll say thanks, Jim, and some of those conversations you were saying you could talk more about. Hopefully, those will be at our table discussions when we move into the lounge area a little later.
Stephen, it looks like your internet's going in and out a little.
Saying best conditions for articulating your value. I'm not hearing.
No, we don't have your slides.
Okay, I will again.
I turned off your video, Stephen, to see if that might help your bandwidth a little.
This is annoying.
Thanks, Brian.
It did get there before. Let me just try doing the PDF. Anyway,
Thank you,
I've got
everyone, for your
these slides
patience. As
here,
I said, it's a new
and
platform that
maybe
we're
this
trying
is
out,
going to be
so
an issue.
appreciate it.
Give me 2 seconds. I apologize for this because it worked just fine before. So the host has muted my video. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can
Yep,
hear
we can hear
you.
you.
Okay, good, because I didn't hear from anybody. Okay, now I'm putting up a PDF file, and it's probably not there. Okay, I'll
No,
just
it's
read my
not.
slides. So I'm
Here,
going
Stephen,
to
if you want
talk
to email
about
it
the
to me
best
really
conditions
fast,
for
I can upload it.
articulating value. And this is one of the, what I thought I could add value to this session by talking about the conditions that are needed to articulate your value. So I had a lovely picture of me as a baby librarian, and it was about how I looked when I first started library school, in my opinion that life is a developmental arc. And if anything, our profession is a continuous learning profession. It's called the practice of librarianship. So you're never, ever, ever fully competent. You just get better all the time. And I think that's important. And today I'll share what I've learned about personal and professional advocacy through experience, trial and error, kicks in the pants, conferences, coaching, and taking workshops. But I think the main point that we need to acknowledge and embed in our souls is that value is an emotional feeling. It's not a price, salary, or title. And until you understand that you are dealing with emotions and people as human, you are often not hitting the mark on articulating your value. You need to connect with them on a relationship emotional level. And that is one of the key insights I've learned over a long career. One of the things around articulating your value is articulating your talent. And I'm seeing that different from skills and competencies, and you've got an MLS, or you've got a technician's diploma, or you've got this experience. And to articulate your talent, you have to actually understand your strengths. There are two things. There's, in my observation, my personal observations of our profession, people have trouble calling themselves experts. And so the word I use is expertise. And we have greater comfort articulating our expertise, and sometimes even going so far as to prove our expertise. So I highly recommend the Strengths Finders books from Gallup and Marcus Buckingham that give you independent viewpoint for free or the cost of the book on what your strengths are. And then you stop focusing on your weaknesses. Like I was always told on my decades of executive level positions where you're sent out every year for executive testing and drilling deep in your head. And it would come out with occasionally what my weaknesses were, like financial accounting. And I always responded to that when they tried to put me into accounting training. Is there a shortage of accounting in this top 500 corporation? Just because they're dominating, what the hell do they have that I should be spending time not using my unique expertise to make a difference here? And that shut down the conversations every time, because making little accountants all through the organization wasn't going to move us forward. So when you look at your expertise in terms of value, can you be known for expertise such as good, caring advice? the conversation you have around the information, or even the highlight pen. I know I'm using old technology, but the virtual highlight pen you put on a PDF to make it easier for them to absorb and read. Are you a good sounding board for research processes for your folks? Are you good at articulating your talents and competencies? Are you known for having certain competencies and talents? Are you known for a point of view? Is your point of view founded in the values of your organization aligned with your own, such as your social values, but it could also be around your values around quality or authority, or any of the values? Like in a law firm, authority is very important. What are your social skills, and are they different from other people's social skills? Do you play well with the team? Do you have a value around being helpful? And not just customer service helpful, but transformational helpful, the way other professionals are in the social services, like doctors or psychiatrists or social workers. And there's a number of ways to communicate value. But when you're talking emotional value, you had better be able to tie it to a social value that is emotionally rattling the chairs in their attic. It's incredibly important. The other thing that's incredibly important around articulating your value is trust. Who do you trust, and whom do they trust? And how do you gain trust? How do you avoid losing trust? And if you lose trust temporarily or in a small way, how do you regain trust? Trust is essential for people to ask a question. Most of us serve fairly professional adults, and it's very difficult for an adult to admit they don't know something, especially in their field of endeavor. So they need to trust you in order to express the question properly, whether we call it a reference interview or a research negotiation or a conversation. They need to trust you in order for you to explore and get the right answers to the questions that Mary Ellen was asking. Because a lot of Mary Ellen's research is external, she's a safe harbor without them having to divulge to an internal competitor for promotions that they can ask a question for something they don't know and decloak. Relationships, can you build them assertively over time and divide them up? They can be professional, personal, or business. Calendar them as a priority. So if you sit there and set aside 15 minutes for a coffee, an hour for a post-work dinner or drink, social times with the rest of the staff, one to build your humanity, and another to build collegial relationships, if not friendships, but sometimes friendships, and partnerships and alliances. This is the sort of stuff that allows you to articulate value without making it a sales call, which many of us have a knee-jerk, difficult reaction to. And then we have to deal with the contradictions. We all know that data does not move minds. Data needs to be turned into information. There's a myth out there that somehow data will make everybody go, oh, their data says this. Well, everybody's gotten really good at arguing with data, but how do you put it into information? How do you make sure it comes from a trusted source that they listen to? When I've been doing data gathering and building information proofs and charts and infographics and visuals to support what the information and data say, I oftentimes hire academics or outside counsel to do the research, to build the proofs in an independent way, so that it's being said by somebody who is equally trustworthy with their brand. So hiring an academic at the University of Toronto, or when I was building value studies for Northern Ontario, I hired a Northern university and a Northern consultant to create those proofs so that I could advocate to the Northern Provincial Parliament. And then how do you turn those into stories because stories are what moves value systems, are what creates the social level of connection, and are what ties to emotion. Now, part of the data and information you're collecting is stuff about your folks. So when I'm lobbying political figures and cabinet ministers, I research them to death. I know what grandkids they have. I know what kids they have. I know what their kids' challenges are. I know that, for instance, their mother is blind. Well, my lead story with the cabinet minister was telling him about, as an offhand comment, about the how every library in Ontario takes advantage of an Ontario grant that was at risk at the time to put all the technology and all the books in the libraries that are facilitated for people with visual handicaps and learning handicaps. I don't like the exceptionalities to do that. That connection let me introduce an awful lot of other advocacy-oriented stuff around generating, and I have generated almost $200 million over the last few years in extra funding for libraries in Ontario. And what my goal is to know what's the behavior I want at the end. So data, turn it into information. It's the transformation between data and information is the magic. Then the transformation is from the information into the stories. And those stories and the transformation is the magic between information and stories. And then the call to action is, can I get a significant number or the individual I need to move to engage in a behavior that meets my needs? Fund me. The measurement is, did they fund me? Did they change that policy? Did they approve the building that I want built? And I've been reasonably successful for that on 25 buildings. So there's a Jekyll and Hyde aspect to this. You need to build more than 7 personalities to bring out as needed in the situation. It doesn't mean that you're a psychopath. It means that you're using the research from the late Edward de Bono's Shoes and Hats. And if I was showing you my slides, there's Edward de Bono's has a book, 6 Action Shoes, and he has a book, 6 Thinking Hats. And both of them have a +1, the royal hat, where you get to be the king or queen. And I highly recommend the de Bono books on thinking, and I highly recommend the Steve Deming's book on springboard stories and the way one crafts stories. And it's very close to what we see in Dave Snowden's work with Cynefin and how to move populations around value and strategy. And I highly recommend the Strengths Finder book from Gallup. And now I will pass it on. Oh, my slides were there. So I'll show you. Let me see if...
Well, actually, Stephen, we'll post the slides after, and it's great to have the further resources that you mentioned, and we'll make sure that everybody can have access to your slides and other slides. And yes, you were a very cute baby librarian, and we're glad we're glad that you've learned so much and that you were able to share it with us today. So we'll have further conversations, but next up is Frank Biss, and Frank is with Counting Opinions, a big supporter of libraries, and he has some background in politics. He has worked with clients so closely and so well for so many years that he has a different or an aligned, I guess, ideas and insights for us. So take it away, Frank.
Do you want me to have the person that asked the question be invited on stage and ask Stephen and Jim? Or you want to?
No, what I'd like is for us to do our questions at the end of the panel. We want to get all the panelists out first, and then we'll go to discussion. So Thanks, Brian.
And I'm keeping track of them.
Yes.
Rebecca, you should be able to go to QA and hit show on stage as well, I think. Or maybe only me and Jane can.
Hi. Hi, everyone. One of the challenges, clearly, with this type of presentation, it's always been sort of my observation, is that if you're going to go on one of these panel conversations, you want to go first, because by the time you start getting to the final speakers, everyone's already made all of your points. So I'm being a little bit facetious in that regard, but I'm going to talk a little bit about articulating the value from a political point of view. And Jim has made some excellent comments, Stephen, and earlier speakers. But here we go. The typical Webster definition of politics is the way that people living in groups make decisions. Politics is about making agreements between people so they can live together in groups such as tribes, cities, or countries. Politicians and sometimes other people may get together to form a government. Okay, that's how it's described. But in the context of today's conversation, I want to revise that definition as follows. I want to basically revise it to the extent that politics is the way that people working in groups make decisions. Politics is about making agreements between people so they can work together in groups to add value to whatever organization they are part of. Now, there we are. Okay, we're keeping up with the slides. So, from just a straight general public point of view, let alone a professional point of view, one of the common comments that I've experienced over the years is that, quote unquote, I have nothing to do with politics. In fact, I cannot stand it. Well, I would argue that we are all involved in politics all of the time. We might call it by various names. For example, how do I convince someone to buy my new car instead of buying my competitor's car? Typically, we would call that sales. But in fact, there's a degree of politics involved. How do I convince my wife to take me to the opera when I know she hates it? We might call that relationship, but it's still politics. Okay? So, and just to further sort of set the stage here for some of my comments, there have been a number of public studies that have been conducted regarding the trustworthiness of various professions, including librarians. And while most of these are related to public librarians, they are instructive. And in a 2016 Maine State Library survey looking at 22 professions, the survey found that librarians were second to nurses with a 78% trustworthiness rating. In a Pew Research study conducted in the fall of 2016, and this was interesting, a large majority of millennials, 87%, say the library helps them find information that is trustworthy and reliable, compared with 74% of baby boomers, ages 52 to 70, who say the same. And more than 8 in 10 millennials, 85%, credit libraries with helping them learn new things, compared with 72% of boomers. And just under 2/3, 63% of millennials, say the library helps them get information that assists with decisions they have to make, compared with 55% of boomers. Now, this, I think, speaks well of for the future of libraries. And I would also argue that with these levels of public trust, this is a great starting place for developing and executing a thoughtful political strategy. So let's consider politics in a special library context. Your library may have a staff of one, or it may have multiple staff members in a number of locations and everything in between. It could be public facing, or it may exist only to serve the needs of your organization's personnel. Or in some cases, it does both. Another factor, your personal style, the personality of your superiors, and your organization's culture. But okay, what does this have to do with politics? I would suggest it has everything to do with politics. Politics is about people. People have idiosyncrasies. As Stephen was pointing out, understanding those idiosyncrasies is integral to good strategy. And the reference I'm going to make at this particular point in time is not a reference that I suspect you will feel comfortable with. But Cambridge Analytica took this particular approach and they applied it to the political process with considerable success. And of course, we know what the public reaction has been to that, but I'm simply use that as an example to suggest that the technology and the capability of what they have done in terms of AI, it's out there in the marketplace. I'm not suggesting you do it, but I'm suggesting that those fundamental realities are important to comprehend and understand. Politics can be many things, but at the end of the day, I would suggest it is arguably the art and science of persuasion. And keep in mind that a good strategy for one person does not necessarily translate into building effective relationships. Okay? We all just witnessed the major summit between Mr. Putin and the president. And prior to that, in terms of a political strategy, when Mr. Putin first met Angela Merkel, the German chancellor who's now retiring, he researched and discovered that Mrs. Merkel had an incredible fear of dogs. So what did he do? He actually had a dog in the room when he first met Mrs. Merkel. A lousy, inappropriate thing to do, but that was part of his strategy. And I don't suggest for a second that these examples are things that I would recommend, but they are examples of how people with a variety of objectives have employed things. I would argue that well thought out, flexible, agile, political reasoning can, not always, produce some very effective outcomes. And these can include larger budgets, career advancement, and in some cases, outright survival from a position standpoint. So what are the components of politics in a special library? I think essentially they're the same as an academic or a public library. Number one, and it's been mentioned previously today, alignment. Ensure that your department's efforts are aligned with the organization's goals. You then need to identify and monitor the ongoing metrics that demonstrate success. And if possible, make sure that they are agreed upon with your superiors. And there's no question that this can be challenging, as again, some of the earlier speakers have mentioned. For example, how do your research efforts contribute to the success of a particular organizational undertaking? And why is this important? Well, some of you may have a boss or a managing partner or a director general who either doesn't like you or truly questions the dollar burden that you represent in his or her budget. And the other thing to do is impress with competence. And I don't mean to be trite when I say this. This is really important. And relationship has been mentioned. And oftentimes, though, this depends on the personalities and the environment in which one works. But if there are organizational challenges, i.e. budget cut, don't count on relationships to save you, especially if the first three components listed here are not fully in place. And then there's the instance where a special library may be banned from conducting any sort of lobbying. And this, of course, is true in government libraries. In this case, third-party advocate strategy is most likely the best option to consider. So in my opinion, without these components, the potential at achieving effective political outcomes can very well be compromised. So suggested next steps in your political quote-unquote demonstrating value process. Number one, assess your landscape. That includes the people you report to. Secondly, your end consumers. C, your department's objectives and goals. 4, your organization's objectives and goals, and monitor them regularly. I would suggest you start a spreadsheet on your home computer, not your work computer. And I mean this respectfully because these are things in terms of political strategy that you are developing for you and for perhaps your organization. And they should be, in my opinion, you should keep them private. They're not for prying eyes. So why is all this important? Quite simply, if you follow these steps, in my opinion, again, I repeat, it should help put you in a position to demonstrate value. And to be clear, you always need to be ready to demonstrate value, either on a regular scheduled timeline, or perhaps even more importantly, on an ad hoc basis. For example, you go into the office one morning and the comment is, we have an unexpected surplus. What should the organization invest in? In most organizations, the first group with their hand up in this situation are the financial types. You need to be ready to offer effective alternatives to simply more than just simply more financial controls in your organization. Secondly, another example, we just lost 2 large clients. Revenues are down. Where do we cut? You need to be able to demonstrate that you and your team, what you and your team do for the organization is of such value that you are not a candidate to be cut. As Jim mentioned earlier, many organizations look at libraries as a cost center. And whenever there's a blip in the financial situation, the CEO and senior management team, the first thing they do, the easiest thing for them to do is to cut budgets in cost centers. And you gotta basically be prepared to fight that every day. Now, I haven't spent any time so far, I'm about to, talking about the more public component of politics, namely politicians. However, if you are in a special library where there is a public political component, for example, informing policy development, etc., the components of a good political strategy are not a lot different, except for the fact the politician is more often than not wanting to get reelected. And you know what? For a politician who wants to get reelected, that's okay. And while you may think that instead of politics, the politician or politicians in question should be shipped directly to an asylum, that's not your call. You are the professional providing the best advice available. The overall electorate will decide the politician's fate. But as a department, especially a public-facing one, I'd recommend having a clear policy on the library's engagement with politicians and so-called political events. For example, what constitutes a library politician event? When does any potentially interpreted library political activity, when should it cease? A potential answer to that might be 6 months before any election. Any public political interaction becomes dormant until after the election, et cetera, et cetera. So when all is said and done, you have to assess your landscape and decide what level of political engagement you need to have in order to meet your department's and your organization's goals and objectives. And this point, I really want to emphasize. There is no one size that fits all. Every situation requires its own political strategy, and that can range from doing nothing, if that's the end conclusion, to a full-blown strategy in terms with a variety of steps and activities and measurements and what have you. And then I would suggest that in politics, one must never overlook the potential of the unexpected. Circumstance can easily trump the best political strategy. You may have done all this wonderful strategy, you may have done all these wonderful things, and all of a sudden circumstance just simply throws it under the rug. And a last thing I would comment to you about politics is that, and in terms of your political strategy, never discount the value of luck. And should you be fortunate enough to experience some, my recommendation is take advantage of it, because you never know if or when it might ever happen again. Thank you and good luck.
Thank you so much, Frank. You are always wonderful, great insights, and you know, you really make us think. It's fantastic. And you know, you mentioned you mentioned going towards the end, and we've left Donna Sheeter till the end, and she has a lot of experience with politics as well, not only within the Library of Congress as law librarian and as president of SLA and president of IFLA, but also with the Democratic National Party and also with the Eastern Market in DC. So Donna has lots of experience. And you also said, Frank, about repeating, you know, similar thoughts, but I don't see it that way. I see it as we're all emphasizing the same things. And the more we hear it, the better it is. So I know that Donna is really aligned with you because she was nodding her head way crazy as you were talking. So please, Donna, your turn.
Thank you, Jane. Whoops, no, I don't want to do that. I just did something wrong. Okay, can everyone see my slides?
Not yet, but.
Oh, Brian, I emailed them to you. Do you think you can upload them for me?
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay, thank you. And then if I can just get rid of that. All right. I'll begin by talking. Actually, about 24 years ago, Jane heard me ranting about librarians who, as Frank was, I think it was Frank who said, "Oh, I don't like politics. I can't get involved in politics." And she inspired me to create a presentation called Politics in the Workplace. And over time, that turned into, with different editions, etc., about to a 3-hour workshop called Getting to Yes in the Workplace, which I did for a number of different library groups. And so now it's for this presentation, I'm going to go fairly quickly, but it's
the slides are up. Just tell me when to hit next.
Just pardon? Let you know when to hit next? Okay. Hit next. So one thing I'm looking at this title today is the use of the word influence, because I started using it long before social media influencers. And so I don't want you to think of the word influence in the social media sense. I want you to think of it in a more in-depth sense of people being able to relate to people in order to get them see what they have in common with what you want to do. So let's start by talking about what is leadership. And I love Peter Drucker because he said the only definition of a leader is someone who has followers, and but to have followers requires influence. And one of the things I want everybody to understand is in your workplace, you do not have to be a manager to be a leader. But you do have to be someone, and this has come up as well, who is respected and trusted for their expertise and for what they bring to the workplace. Next slide, please. Next, Brian. Yeah. So back. Yeah. So a colleague of mine who was the former head of the House of Commons Library, I thought for librarians, put this really well. She said librarians must be political, but not in the party sense of political, but must be willing and able. So that's will but it's also competence and expertise to use all of their professional skills to advance the library in any way possible. And one of the things I want everyone here to understand is, again, it's not, when you talk about advocacy for the library, it's not just the job of the manager or the head of the library. It's the job of everybody who works there to understand what the value is of what they're doing and to be able to articulate that in a very concise and quick way. And as Mary Ellen would say, in terms of outcome. So we need to be sure that everybody thinks of themselves as an advocate for what they're doing. Next slide, please. Brian, next. Okay. So along with what Frank's definition, I have my definition of what politics in the workplace is. And I'm going to distinguish, because there are bad leaders. There is bad politics. We've all seen examples both in the public life and in our own organization sometimes. But I like to think that we're leading to bring people together to get the right things done in our organizations. And the right thing for the organization is what furthers the goals, the mission of the organization itself. So good leaders are inclusive. They further the goals of the organization. They're aligned with them, as Frank and others have said. And they use consensus and collaboration. Bad leaders, and I worked for one time, excludes others in order to build their own personal power at the expense of organizational goals. And I'll bet most people in this room have in this virtual room, have run across somebody like that at some point in their career. They isolate individuals and groups and guess what? Pit them against one another. We've seen that in public life as well. And what results for this? It's wasting the knowledge and the expertise of the organization. So I hope you can see that we're going to go into how to practice. I'm going to give you some real practical tips about how to, when you have when you have a proposal, when you are trying to get something done for the good of the organization, what you need to think about in order to make that happen. Next slide, please, Brian. Okay, so gaining and exerting influence is a process, and that's what we're going to talk about. And process is as important as content. When I worked for the Congressional Research Service, we would do seminars for congressional staff and the heads of congressional offices, and we would tell them that we used to put out a thing called the Major Legislation of Congress. The Major Legislation of Congress wasn't a compilation of the best ideas. It was a compilation of the things that had a chance of getting things done. Probably today it would be a much thinner book than it was in the past because we're having difficulty getting things done here in the United States. But nevertheless, it's where not only is there a good idea, a good policy goal, but there are people who have thought about how to get it through the legislative process. And there are processes in your office, processes in your organization, or if you're a public library, processes where you need to get funding, et cetera, from outside sources. So having your process put together is as important as the good idea that you're trying to implement. Next slide, please, Brian. Okay, so here's tip number one. We're going to build relationships. Influence is based on trust, and trust is based on relationships. People are more likely to listen carefully and consider things when they're being asked to do something or to support something by people that they know than by people that they're meeting for the first time. So what does this mean? This means that you do things. You're other focused in your organization. You welcome new people who come in, even if they're not in your office. You try to get to know people all over in every different office. Especially the offices that tend to interact and have influence over what happens in your part of the organization. But you really need to ask people, learn about their families, figure out the things they like to talk about. Do they have a hobby? Just check in with them, see them in the coffee line, see them in the cafeteria, checking in with people. Trying to understand their learning about them to understand their point of view. So you're much more likely to get a yes from somebody if they already know you and trust you than if you're asking them for something for the first time. Next slide, please, Brian. So build your favor bank. Again, it's common sense. People feel good towards people who have helped them, for example, when they even ask them for help. So, volunteering your help. This works in organizations a lot. Gain recognition and visibility. That's good for you and it's good for but remember, you're doing this for your organization. So you're out there working with others, but also making sure that it's your organization that's at the table, and that people know a little bit more about what you do after working with you in some group. And people are much more likely to help those who have helped them. So again, it often can be little things like offering people a ride home if they don't have a way home from some meeting that's in the evening. That's an association thing, for example. That's what I used to do in DC after DC Democratic State Committee meetings. I knew people who didn't have cars, and I'd offer them a ride home. And you talk in the car, you learn a lot about people that way. So building your favor bank is important. Number 3, please. Next slide, Brian. Now, this is important. as you build relationships, build trust, and building your favor bank, you're learning about your organization. And one of the things you should keep on your computer as home, as Frank suggested, is your power map. They're more useful than organization charts because power maps plot out who influences whom. Often people who are not on the chart, they're not the people that you would expect, have influence over certain kinds of decisions. And so, so you need to start understanding how decisions are being made in your organization and who the influencers are. And I'll give you an example. So when I worked at Congressional Research Service, I was not the government documents librarian. I was a head of a information services group that worked for that answered questions only for members of Congress. But my director, when it came to government publications and things that were coming across his desk, I'm the person that he would ask. So you wouldn't see me on the organization chart, but I should be on your power map for that particular issue. So again, it's important to spend some time thinking about this and starting to map it out. And particularly when it comes to a specific proposal that you have to really do your homework. Next slide, please. Now, this is really important too. Build alliances. And build them before you need them. Alliances can be for a long-term kind of thing. You find maybe hopefully you're so good that you can build alliances with your technology office. Not often where we see eye to eye with things, but who are the people that have things in common with what your particular part of the organization are? Who are the people that have the bigger goals in mind as well? So it's easier to do when you've built relationships through networking. And you may align with somebody on one issue or a more long-term thing. Often you can connect networks to build alliances. That's bringing more people together that don't necessarily know each other. But if you have an alliance, it strengthens the position and it results in greater influence. So you should always be thinking about who can I work with. Next slide, please. Says 6, do your homework. I sometimes my brain goes blip, and so we didn't really skip 5. Forget the numbers. Never go into a meeting on a decision that will affect your organization or function, or as a proposal that you have made without being fairly sure of the outcome. So how do you do your homework? Well, you go around and talk to the people that are going to be in the meeting, or the people who you think influence those people, and you, especially if it's your proposal, before they go to the meeting, you say, so what do you think? Are you having problems with anything here? And then you see if you can negotiate. You see if you can compromise. And often, if you think you're going to go into a meeting and you're going to have a thumbs down on something, withdraw the proposal. Better to withdraw, go back and scope, rethink, redo for another day than having an all-out no on this idea. So you need to do your homework. You need to know what the other people in the meeting are thinking. I often called what I would do, I'd have these, I called them plop downs, because in my office, maybe in your office, it's the same way, although this is harder now with work, with virtual workplaces and that. So maybe you can do a virtual plop down, but it's taking some downtime and going into somebody's, knocking on their door saying you got a few minutes. It's someone particularly if it's people you have relationships with, and getting their read on the situation. So that's so important that you have your intelligence. Next slide, please. Yeah, negotiations frequently don't happen in a meeting, they happen before. So never go into the meeting on a decision affecting your organization without being fairly certain ahead of time what the outcome will be. And again, if you think it's not going to be a favorable outcome, you might want to find a way to regroup. Next slide, please. Get and use feedback. This is what I was just talking about. Chat with others about how the meeting went. You know, when you have these weekly meeting, maybe you have a weekly group, you get something and something happens in it. Gather others' perceptions on how the dynamics went, because not everybody thinks like you. Not everybody has the same relationships that you have. So you wanna find out more, you know, and remember that those who don't speak in public might in private. This is why you want to have some one-on-ones with people and talk through things that are going on. And those and add those that you meet for the first time to your network. You know, introduce them, you know, introduce them to people you think that they might benefit from knowing from, that they might grow a relationship with. Be generous in that, you know, again, back to a good leader is inclusive. So part of inclusivity is bringing people together. Next slide. Paybacks. Okay. So sometimes you get stabbed in the back. That's the way it is. Especially if you have leaders who are in the second category, that they're in this for themselves. They're not in it, you know, they look at your success as a personal affront to them. If you have power, they don't. So often you are, you know, our tendency is to want to get back at people, but trust is our currency. So you don't want to go around bad-mouthing people, because what will people say? If she bad-mouths them, what does she say about me behind my back? So you don't want to do things to undermine your own trust. So don't volunteer derogatory information, but do feel free to be honest when asked. It may take a very long time, but at some point, somebody's going to ask you, maybe because they know you know this person or whatever, or ask for your opinion about something, and then you should be honest. And you have to be honest, because that's part of the trust issue. So it's okay to be honest when asked, but you really don't make it personal. No gloating. Don't let or if you have been asked and the outcome for the person is not so good, don't ever let anybody know that you were the source of anybody's difficulty. So be trusted, not feared. Next slide, please. Fill the void. This is part of the luck thing, I think, Frank. Fill power vacuums, don't create them. Be willing to take risks. So sometimes that, you know, sometimes there's something that the director needs to have done that no part of the organization really wants to do. You should think about, you know, if you can find any way that it's slightly aligned with what you're doing, go ahead and say, well, you know, put your organization up there. And I know that staff all the time say we don't have the we can't do this without more resources. Well, you're not going to get more resources until you create the problem that you didn't have enough. And so I think really part of filling the void is and taking risks is saying to people, we can do a good job at this. And yes, we want to make the problem that we're so successful that we obviously have demonstrated value, and we can demonstrate more value if they give us additional resources to take on the new demand. So don't be afraid to fill the void. Look in Frank's words, look at it maybe as a stroke of luck. Next, use consensus and compromise. people don't like the word compromise sometimes. And they, but politics is the art of the possible. Otto von Bismarck said that. And so you need to remember that not everyone may be ready to make as great a change as fast as the vision or your vision would have them do. And I like to say sometimes that creeping incrementalism will get you a lot farther than trying to enact wholesale change. Next slide. So how do you judge compromise or sellout? When is compromise okay? So a lot of people make the mistake of judging compromise from the desired outcome point of view, but you really have to judge it from the present forward, not the long-term goals backward. So if it moves you forward from the present, then that's a good thing. But if it's going to move you backward from the present, then no, you cannot do that. And if you're going to agree or promote a compromise, it's really important you have alliances, that everybody is on the same page and that the allies know and understand. So when you're putting your process together, these are all the things. The process adjusts as it goes along. And these are some of the things that you have to remember to, again, be inclusive in the information and the decision making on these things. Next slide, please. No bomb throwing. This is one of the things that used to drive me crazy. People who are in the negative category will do things like wait till the meeting to bring up their objection when you talk to individuals about your issues first. Let people, if you've got a problem with something somebody's proposing, go see them, try to work it out. Don't hold it to try to throw a bomb into the public forum. Don't wait for a public forum to raise serious issues. Bomb throwers damage relationships, they undermine trust, and they lose influence. So you don't want to be a bomb thrower. Next slide, please. Be a team player. Respect the will of the majority. Support group decisions, and this is hard, be willing to admit when you're wrong. But those are three things that are hallmarks of a good leader. And next slide. Acknowledge your supporters. Let them know when success is achieved, and remember to say thank you. And actually, always give more credit to your team than you take for yourself. I was just reading the Walter Isaacson book on biography of Benjamin Franklin, and I was so surprised to see that this particularly was the way he had all these fire brigades. He had libraries that they were not free libraries, but they were early libraries in Philadelphia. And he got all of these things started by letting other people think it was their ideas and giving them most of the credit for the success. So this one goes back a long way. So that's politics in the office in a nutshell, and how to practice in I think an ethical and in a way that can get you and your supporters to yes with value. And to go back to what are you trying to do? You're trying to talk about doing something that adds more value to the organization. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate being here today. And I really appreciated being able to listen to all my co-presenters too, because I think we all together have converged on a really good way of looking at how we can be effective in our organizations. Thank you.
Thanks, Donna. That's terrific. And as you say, I think that all of